I became a UFO expert, but not on purpose. I was an amateur astronomer before I became a professional astronomer. So every university where I served, they said, you have to handle all the UFO reports. So, and about 99% of what people would report to me as UFOs, I could explain as natural phenomena, a hoax, or secret government military activity. But there's a 1% residual that falls in a different category. And these would be UFO phenomena that observers report violating the laws of physics. On the other hand, they leave evidence indicating that they're real phenomena. And that, I think, explains why you have a lot of scientists and skeptics saying this doesn't exist, because they come from a worldview that doesn't permit the existence of non physical reality. But I do believe in the existence of non physical reality, because the Bible tells us God created two different species of intelligent life, one that's constrained by the physics of the universe and one that is not. And we're talking about humans that are indeed constrained by the dimensions and laws of physics of the universe, and angels who are not. And these angels live in a different dimensional realm, but God has given them the power to come in temporarily into our realm. So I think that's where that 1% residual falls. Some of the strongest evidence for that is that where you got multiple observers tracking a UFO going through the atmosphere, which means we can actually calculate its trajectory and velocity. And the velocities often run between 5 and 25,000 miles per hour. But the observers never record the occurrence of a sonic boom or a heat friction trail behind the UFO. If it was a physical object, you would get a sonic boom. You would get a heat friction trail, just like you do when one of the spaceships go through our atmosphere from the International Space Station. However, there are a couple of thousand cases documented where the UFO not only goes through our atmosphere, it crashes into the Earth. And when you go to the crash site, you see a crater. If there's snow, the snow is melted. The vegetation is consistently damaged. But as you investigate that crater site, there's never any debris, there's no artifacts. If it was a physical craft crashing into the Earth, you'd be able to recover some debris and artifacts. But the fact that you see a crater and melted snow and damaged vegetation means that something physical caused that. So we're dealing with physical and non-physical reality, or what the French astrophysicist Jacques Vallée referred to. He says we're dealing with interdimensional phenomena. I mean, he's not a believer, but that was his conclusion. We're dealing with a phenomena that's operating in dimensions different than those of the universe.
We often don't talk about the spiritual battle that is going on, that there's this unseen realm where this battle is unfolding, right? And I think about what you were just describing. I also have pondered as a journalist, and I've often thought, okay, well, you have a situation where people are claiming that there are beings and there are spaceships and they're talking about them as though they're physical, and they will describe it where these beings are so intelligent, they crash, they've been unable to detect crash, as though they're so intelligent, they crash and then they mysteriously disappear right away. And it just doesn't seem to add up. If you're so intelligent and so good at escaping, how did your aircraft crash consistently, right? And so what you're describing as these spiritual elements, I think it's really an interesting idea to think of it that way. And I think the question people would then naturally have for you, and I'd love to get your take on this, right? What exactly would you definitively say, and it seemed like you were saying this, that this is essentially the angelic and demonic realm, really the demonic realm that maybe we're dealing with here in a spiritual sense, not a literal alien flying around in space in the physical?
Well, back in the 1960s, the U.S. government commissioned the physicist Allen Hynek to investigate the UFO phenomena. And he was the one that came up with this term, close encounters, of the first kind, second kind, and third kind. And what you notice in these, a close encounter of the first kind is where the human contactee is within 500 feet of the UFO phenomena. And when you're talking about the second kind, this is where they actually begin to experience some kind of physical harm. There have even been instances where people have been killed or their animals have been killed. And then there's instances where people claim to have direct communication with UFO beings. But what's interesting about these close encounters, it's never beneficial. It's always deleterious. The best you're going to come away from with one of these encounters is recurring, terrifying nightmares. Worst case scenario, you get killed. So they're harmful, but there's also evidence that there's deception involved in these encounters. Because when people claim to have had conversation with these UFO beings, they will claim, well, in fact, if you go back 100 years ago, they were saying they were from the backside of the moon. But when the public became educated enough to realize that's not credible, they changed their story and said, well, we're from Venus. And when people realized how hot it is on the surface of Venus, they said they were from Mars. Well, now they're claiming to be from another planetary system. So the fact that they keep changing their story, and then you've got those cases where the human contactee goes into a trance and then they begin to type out what the UFO being wants them to communicate. And
It sounds like automatic writing, by the way. That sounds very similar to what
it's automatic writing, and it's extensive. I mean, probably the most dramatic example would be a big book, the Urantia book. It's kind of the Bible for all these UFO cults. And some editions run 4,000 pages. The entire book was communicated through automatic writing. But what's interesting about the Urantia book, about a third of its content denies the deity of Jesus Christ. So there, I think you can see the deceptive motivation behind this UFO phenomena.